the EscapeGoat podcast, a podcast series featuring the discussion of many different topics, flaws and all, based on personal whims and fascinations. Hosted by me, David Blake Fagiani, and several different guests. Welcome to the EscapeGoat podcast, episode 17, and I'm actually pleased to welcome back, slightly earlier than I'd intended to, really, but for good reason, my brother Matthew. How you doing?
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches, senor.
Sorry, I was just thinking about Raul Julia a bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, you're only human.
Yeah, amazing.
There were these photos doing the rounds on the internet, on Twitter, particularly this week, of Raul Julia. It's Raul Julia, is it not Julia?
Raul Julia,
yeah. As like Dracula in, I think, what looked like a kind of like 70s, like early 80s, maybe, like Dracula Broadway play.
Yeah, I like to picture it was 1979 for some reason. I don't know why. It's just a cool year.
Sure. It's a very good year. Yeah. It was a very good year.
It was a very good year for Broadway and zombie films.
Sure was. Yes. But yeah, how are you doing, Matt? How are you getting on?
I'm fine, thank you, man. I'm just deep in horror season right now. I've literally just come off recording mine and Mike's Halloween special for Matt and Mike Pull Focus plug. Mm-hmm. And we talked about our favourite obscure horror films. We did a list of our top 5, and it was really cool because initially we had the idea that we would just do a top 5 of our favourite horror films, but then last minute we did a little U-turn, and we thought we'll talk about obscure ones, you know, and ones that people might not have heard of. And so yeah, that was really cool, man. Very productive, and I found out that Mike has a great fear of aliens and UFOs, which I didn't know.
Oh,
so
amazing.
I learned something new about Mike, which was cool.
It's always nice to know friends' fears that you can exploit, isn't it?
Oh, totally, dude, yeah. He was sort of citing the moments from Signs and stuff, you know, with like the aliens standing on the roof and stuff like that. That was kind of like some of his childhood trauma right there.
Oh,
so
nice.
That was interesting. And I was telling him about, obviously, as he well knows, my sort of childhood fear of werewolves. Which is totally irrational. But,
yeah, I've heard you. I've not only heard you talk about that for decades, but I've heard you guys talk about that on mic together. Yeah, to expunge this stuff, you know. Are you hoping to have that episode out by Halloween then?
Yeah, definitely. What we've actually got we've got Alien 3, an episode we recorded about a month ago, which we're actually going to use as our official Halloween episode. But then I think is actually the top 5 sort of horror film recommendations episode we're going to have out hopefully in a week. So yeah, just before Halloween, and then Alien 3 should be out on Halloween. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we've been for quite a productive couple of months.
Oh, that's really exciting. Yeah, that should be really good. It's weird actually, isn't it, this year? Because Halloween is one of those things that like most dates really tends to creep up on me quite a bit. But me and Matt are recording this today on the 8th of October, and it's really close now, isn't it? And it partly just because this is such an unusual year, a lot of the kind of traditional stuff, you know, obviously we can talk a little bit about the state of cinema at the moment.
Oh God, yeah,
just isn't really happening, or not in a very public way, you know.
Yeah, I think the Bond has just been pulled like from release. They're not going to give it a cinema release until sometime next year. And I think that's pretty much the final nail in the coffin for cinema this year. Mm-hmm. Possibly cinema for all time, but we'll find that soon. Soon about that. But yeah, it's really a bad move on their part, on the which massive corporation releases Bond. I don't know.
Yeah, it's it's at Universal, I think. Because Warner Brothers released.
Yeah, is it MGM or are they part of Universal?
I'm not sure. I've lost track of all that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I'm guessing that Tenet was unsuccessful, you know, and I don't actually know. I've not looked at the box office numbers, but I'm assuming it can't have made that much money.
So what I'm reading is that it seems to have been like obviously less successful than planned, but like relatively break-even-y outside the States. But I think the States, partly because of the state of their pandemic and also because of regulations and just kind of commercial ambition at the moment in the States, it didn't really do very well domestically. And I think the reason they're scared about what I read was the reason that Universal are balking about Bond and everything is that just that they don't have enough faith in the international market in a way, or in the stability of the international market, or something like that.
I heard this story a few years ago, which kind of put like, you know, box office and like, you know, major motion picture like blockbusters into perspective in terms of, you know, how profits are made, because it was the head of Sony, one of the CEOs of Sony, Pictures was talking about the release of something like, I think it was Iron Man 3 or something like that, and the story was basically, like the interviewer was asking, if you're spending $150 million plus on a movie and then $500 million on marketing or whatever it is, how could you possibly make a profit off this movie? And she said that the point that what you don't think of is that if you release Iron Man 3 and it's a hit, Sony stock goes up overnight, and that's profits of $2 billion.
Right.
So, so that's the kind of level that they're thinking at. They're not thinking about bums on seats. They're thinking about, the stock market, basically. That's how these things work,
I see. Some of which goes into at least sustaining the studio, I guess, although most of it goes into, executive pockets and investors' pockets and stuff,
Yeah, exactly. It's like with these major tentpole films like that, that's how they're thinking. They're not thinking about, attendance. So that's why I guess that the streaming services and that kind of market is certainly not gonna go away anytime soon, and is still profitable. But I don't know about cinema, man. I don't know what's gonna happen. We shall see.
Well, I remember you and me talking, because for listener background, I've done a few seasonal shifts in the cinema back when I was young. But you worked in the cinema for a few years, didn't you, Matt?
I did, yeah. I did a good couple of years at the Odeon in Manchester, which was very eye-opening. Not just for learning how cinema and films are projected, but more about customer behaviour as well. It was quite eye-opening. Plenty of stories there, enough for a book. But yeah, it was it was good, man. I mean, it was great seeing so many movies at that time as well. So many, especially on shift when you just wandered in and out of cinema. I think I watched Deadpool probably in total about 25 times, just from seeing beginning, middle and end, repeated over and over again on screen checks and stuff. Yeah, I
think from what I remember towards the end of you working in cinema, I think you and I had a bit of a conversation. You probably chatted to other people about it too, but I think we got talking about the future of cinema, because this would be back 2017, 2018, whenever you finished doing that.
Yeah.
But then obviously not in terms of the COVID pandemic, but we were talking about just the sort of shifts to home viewing and streaming and everything like that. And I think you were saying that even back then cinemas were not exactly jittery, but they were just already making moves to sort of diversify their activities, right? You're saying they're increasingly doing conference hosting and stuff like that.
Yes, absolutely. They were trying to make more profitable use of the space, because the truth is that apart from when you had a huge tentpole film release, Avengers, Avengers Endgame, or I remember 22 Jump Street was incredibly busy. It gave you this insight. This was what was interesting. It really showed you what people were coming out for, and it was basically Fast and Furious, Jurassic Park, 22 Jump Street, which I thought was interesting. That was really, really busy for a month, But yeah, they were trying to rent out for conferences. They were trying to bring in sort of better food and stuff like that. But I think what I kind of took away from it was that the giant multiplex 19 screens is just unsustainable. Basically, it was something that in the mid in the 90s going through to the sort of mid noughties, late noughties, it was very, very feasible, and they were still filling up. But by the time I was working there in 2015, 2016, it was just that was pretty much done. And these cinemas that were making that had 3 luxury screens were making much more money, because they were always full, because there's only 3 screens, and they were also offering new stuff like comfier chairs and gourmet food and drinks and stuff like that. So yeah, when I left there, it was kind of, that's what the direction it was going in, and I imagine it's still very much the smaller cinemas are going to be more profitable.
Yeah, well, I was reading that also, that with Cineworld shutting down as it is this week, basically. I heard that a lot of the smaller independent cinemas will, at least for a while, be able to eke out more competitive screenings and stuff. We were talking before about the Prince Charles in London, reopening, and I think unless the crackdown becomes more draconian and the government regulations change, they'll continue to do okay as a niche, at least survival levels. But yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because you were talking about the multiplexes being kind of a doomed beast anyway, and this is just a sort of hyper accelerant event, but it makes sure what's actually going to happen to those spaces, because obviously the cinemas would have to swallow a lot to actually change and alter those spaces. But the thing that would have happened traditionally maybe is that they would have got knocked down and turned into office space or something, and probably office space is on a long-term decline now as well. What more flats, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, casinos. I can only think event centers. But yeah, like you say, it's really The Trafford Centre, man. Like, like going to the Trafford Centre, like, is that just, how could you, repurpose a structure like that? I mean, that's retail, that's a different topic, but it's kind of going the same way, obviously, with, online, everything being online, online deliveries, etc. I doubt they were thinking that far ahead when they built places like that.
For anyone who didn't grow up in the northwest of England, the Trafford Centre is kind of this like really unlikely kind of like cosmically tacky kind of shopping centre that in sort of southwest Manchester, which me and Matt have been opened when I was just about to be a teenager, I think, in the mid to late 90s, and it hosts a huge cinema and a bunch of other stuff, and it somehow survived to this point. I've got no idea if it's even going to survive to the end of this year, really, but.
It's like you say, it's huge. It's like, when you look at it, it's a huge tacky temple to consumerism. It's the biggest shopping centre I've ever been in. I think, do you have the Westfield shopping centre in London?
Yeah, and that's funny because that's a place name that means a lot to me and Matt growing up. So when I found that was most known in London for being the Trafford Centre equivalent, it was funny.
Yeah, and have you been?
I think there's 2 Westfields, and I don't think I've ever been to either of them. Well, I've been very near the one in Stratford because a mate lived there, but it's not in a big rush, and certainly not now.
Maybe Stratford shopping centre will make a comeback because it's the right size.
Well, I suppose the probably the cessation or at least huge die off in traditional retail outlet Christmas shopping this year is going to be fatal for those places, right? I mean, like, because that would have been it. Like the way the pandemic seems to be at the moment in the UK, getting worse. In time for it doesn't look like it's going to get substantially better before the end of the year now. So like I presume I'm not saying people are going to stop spending at Christmas, but there's going to be so much online, even more so, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, these the sort of traditional Christmas markets and the sort of pull to be in the city centre and to be at the Trafford Centre at Christmas and stuff. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be there at the same volume, and those figures are going to affect, like you said, places like that, drastically. I didn't see any of this coming, man. Not even like without the pandemic, but even the sort of the change of when we started going to places like the Trafford Centre, to go and see movies like in the late 90s, early noughties. There was just no way I saw this coming. I just thought it was going to get bigger, brasser, bolder, as time went on. But we're kind of seeing a regression here, like back to cinema sizes of the 70s, 60s, and 70s, rather than the sort of multiplexes of the 80s and 90s. It's just going backwards, man.
It feels like I'm trying to think of things to compare it to, because obviously you never know. In the best case scenario where a vaccine is relatively quickly available and things pivot a little bit back to normal, things may get more back to normal than we think. Who knows? But it does feel like we're living through one of those big moments. I think the other things I can compare it to is like the advent of like popular air travel, for example, or like horses being phased out in favour of cars over the course of a couple of decades, things like that. And it feels like we're in one of those moments where just a whole bunch of things that wouldn't have happened otherwise, and then, but probably more so, a whole bunch of things that were already on the way are just happening quicker, right? And it just feels like, and obviously not for very good reasons, well, not for nice reasons.
It's sort of an exponential failure, isn't it? It's like something that's, like you said, has probably been on the cards for a very, very long time, but it's as it's failing, it's accelerating and getting quicker. So we really are at the cliff edge now.
Yeah, and you just sort of end up hoping, like, just on a sort of human level, don't you, that just as many of your friends and family and stuff can be taken along on that wave, like through luck, but also through government investment and policy and stuff. You just hope that this isn't going to be too terrible for the actual people involved in these moments.
Yeah, because that's the reality of it. Is, you say like, oh, it sucks that cinemas, on the way out and Cineworld and everything. That is people's careers and that's people's jobs, and it's so it does affect people on a very, very pivotal level. But hope for the best for those people, and that they can be rehoused in smaller cinemas.
I genuinely think that obviously some people at one end of the spectrum are just very, very selfish, and some people are saints, but most people are just somewhere in between, and they use a bit of empathy and a bit of experience to kind of relate to people as much as they can or have time for or energy for. But I really do think one thing that helps you like care for and think about other people in society is if you either have done jobs like those jobs that are at risk, or you have family members or friends who are doing those jobs. And it really does, it's like, as I say, you worked at cinema for a long time. I've done cinema shifts, we both worked retail, we both worked in like outlets, both worked in catering, things like that. It's kind of, when those jobs are threatened, you might be sort of uber rationalist and be like, well, change has to come, and that has to happen, but you can't wish away that concern, can you? Like, you can, because you can think of yourself in that position, you can think of your family in that position, you can think of what the times when you've been broke in your life and what that's meant to you, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone's had experience of that, and maybe, like, you know, losing a job or being broke or, you know, whatever. But yeah, like you say, if you've got a family member who is actually directly affected, or it's something that you've had experience in, you can really empathize. And you know, it's like Donald Trump getting COVID. Like, you know, he had to get COVID for him to fully understand it, and now he's the president to lead us into this next decade, you know, because now that
I think that's how it works. Yeah.
He's had, well, of course, like, you know, you get COVID and now you understand COVID, you know, it's like, that's the way
on a deep scientific level.
Yeah. Are you seriously thinking that we could have had a president who didn't get COVID? Like, really?
The way, nothing about him should surprise me anymore, but you know, the way he's walking, as I say, this is the 8th of October 2020 today, the way Donald Trump is now walking around basically claiming that he's not contagious, and all his doctors are like... Just like, I don't know what to think anymore. Did you watch any of the vice presidential debate? Any clips from it? Or?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I watched most of it this morning, and it was. I just wish that she'd noticed the fly on his head. I just thought that would have been a perfect kind of you've got a fly on your head. What? You've got a fly like on your head. I really just wish it had been noticed live. But I think she was. Is it Kamala Harris?
Kamala Harris. Yeah.
There was a few moments where I was just like, answer the fucking question, man. Come on, like, don't be like them. You know, there was a few moments like that. But
she had a few bits like that. Yeah.
Overall, she's a rational, you know, liberal human being. So, you know, I like her a lot more. But there were a few moments like that where I was just like, don't be like them, man.
Yeah.
Don't be like them, you know, answer the question.
I completely agree with that, especially the stuff around the Supreme Court, right? Because they presumably think that's testing really well with the Republicans think that's testing really well with their audience, you know, alongside things like castigating the Green New Deal and things like that. I mean, I thought it was interesting, wasn't it? Because they both, I think, arguably, well, no, I think it's barely arguable, really. I think they just outperformed their respective bosses, right? You know,
yes, definitely.
Pence by a long way over Trump, and Harris, I think, is a slightly better candidate in my opinion than Biden is, but they were both good, you know, and better. And I guess it was a more traditional. This is going to make me sound really centrist, but a more traditionally palatable form of debate. You know, where there was a bit of interrupting, obviously a little bit of talking over each other, but most of it was cogent, and they were kind of polite to each other, and they kind of, you know, turned over to each other, even if slightly reluctantly at times, you know. And there was a little bit of calling each other liars, and, you know, just calling things liars. I suppose it was that, wasn't it? It was this election, but just through a more polite filter, really.
Well, also it's kind of like it's all, you know, relative, because, you know, if you'd seen that very debate, you know, last night 10 years ago, you would have said it was frosty and coarse and, you know, and extremely volatile, high stakes. But, you know, compared to, you know, I think that's what I listen to quite a few like liberal pundits and sort of, you know, vloggers and YouTubers and stuff. Mainly a guy called David Pakman. Do you know him? Have you watched his?
I don't actually, but we can put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, he's you know, I mean, he's just, you know, very left sort of leaning. You know, I mean, the thing is, I have that kind of South Park politics thing where, like, you know, the left wind me up as well, and you know, so I don't really like watching CNN and stuff, and, you know, because I am a liberal and I'm totally on their side, but at the same time, you know, it's like, you know, it's some of that. They remind me of the right too much sometimes, just in the way that they push ideas and stuff. You know, it's kind of grates on me a little bit.
Well, and like you just said there, you know, like Harris dodging questions and stuff. You know, that's annoying whoever does it, right?
Exactly. But anyway, yeah, his you know, his mantra is, don't let this get normalized. You've got to treat Trump as if it's the first time you've ever seen him, and I think that's really important, because it's so easy to get to this behaviour and this rhetoric to get normalised, and then you just kind of don't think it's extreme or shocking or vulgar anymore, you know, or bigoted. You know, you just kind of let it slide. And I think you know, that's one thing I take away from this David Pakman guy, is that he judges every act of Trump's as if it's the first time he's done it, which I think is great, and it's something that I think you've got to try and keep up if you can.
Yeah, I suppose that Biden, in so much as Biden could be said to have a strategy for that, he was trying to highlight that a bit, wasn't he? Like in his debate, like kind of like calling him a clown, and, you know, just like pointing out how ridiculous this was and non-presidential it was and stuff like that. You know?
Yeah. Biden was strongest, I think, when he addressed the camera, you know, which Pence tried to do a little bit of, I noticed. But, you know, when he sort of said, "Look at the empty seat at your breakfast table" and that kind of thing, I thought those were the most effective moments. With Biden, where I sort of thought he was doing well. What's this podcast about again?
Yeah, we should get off that, shouldn't we?
I'm enjoying this. I'm just
yeah, no, me too. I'm hoping to do some more like overtly political podcasts in the next few weeks. So that was more just to sort of trail in, to let people know I've been paying attention.
We should start doing that. Do like I'll be like Stephen Colbert, and be like a fake right-wing pundit, and like you could be like a an extreme left-wing pundit, and we could make a comedy show.
Yeah.
It'd be and it would be, the whole thing would be really, really funny.
Well, it wouldn't actually be that funny, man.
Actually, no.
I'm glad we talked that through. So I should say that the reason I've got Matt back on the show, and as I say, like, I like to stagger the guests fairly evenly, and kind of like space them out and everything like that. So I was sort of half planning to have you back on, but it's basically because you and your wife Sally have been watching The Sopranos.
Yes, finally gotten round to it after a decade and a half.
Daddy! Dad!
How are you feeling now?
Good. Fine. Back at work. By the time I was a kid, I knew I'd run a family business.
What line of work are you in?
Waste management consultant.
It's a gift from Tony Soprano.
Are you in the mafia?
This is overdue. Am I in the what? Like my uncle ran it. Like my father ran it. I'd run it.
You said you were in waste management.
Jimmy says hello from hell, you The environment.
One of Gangland's leaders died late this afternoon.
Times have changed.
Nobody knows who's running things anymore. Coincidence if it wasn't, wouldn't it?
And the feds are always there lurking. And believe me, things ain't much better.
Say hello to my little friend.
Yeah, because The Sopranos wrapped up in 2007-8, the 2007-8 season, I think, and when I was at university, and I was watching it then, and I've been, I was going to say I've been bugging to watch it. I mean, it's on and off a little bit, but I think it's just one of those things where I kind of thought you were never going to get around to watching it because I know you keep up with TV and film and everything, but it's just one of those things that was like getting a little bit fossil layer for TV. It was getting like a little bit in like 2020. It was like there's so much new TV coming out all the time, and so much quality TV, and so much other stuff you could watch and give your attention to. It's like
it's 4:3. It's like it's like the ratio, I think, is like, it was back before widescreen TVs or like an advent, so it's starting to date slightly just in terms of its format.
I remember people who are a bit. I mean, you're a bit more techie than me in that sense, and loads of people are more techie than both of us. But like, I remember people talk about The Wire. They were going back to The Wire, which sort of started in, I think, 2002. The Wire, and they would just talk about how just for them, for like real Blu-ray heads and stuff, like The Wire was borderline unwatchable. Because it just looked like it was like trying to watch something on old black and white telly or something.
Well, it's that thing where like obviously like you can tell. I think it's that thing where it's the beginning of an era, so it's the end of one era and then right at the start of another. So it's kind of like it's more noticeable at those periods, at those kind of crossover periods. When sort of that kind of standard definition had run its course, and it was kind of coming in then HD. But now everything is so incredibly crystal clear, and just again, technology is exponential. So as it gets better, it gets better quicker. So like the developments in the last 10 years in terms of picture quality from HD to ultra HD is just like insane. But no, but if the content's good, then it never really dates. It's one of these things where like it's TV looks a lot better now. There's no doubt. There's no difference now between film cameras and TV cameras. But it's the content is brilliant. So I'm sure The Wire is still very, very watchable.
Well, you get with The Sopranos, you get from like 99 to 2007, you get this tremendous evolution of obviously the genre partly helped along by The Sopranos, but you also get that the look of The Sopranos itself turns from a classy, expensive 90s looking TV show like very notably into a noughties looking TV show, and it's a bit of a sea change. It happens. It's like boiling a frog. It doesn't just happen all in one episode. It's not like they upgrade it one season and they get all this like huge budget and new cameras. It just happens gradually, and the style changes, and evolves. But so if you watch the first episode of The Sopranos and then the finale, years later, there's a real difference in look and style. But it doesn't happen all at once.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that, because it pretty much does kind of straddle that era, really, the sort of high definition era, doesn't it? Because I remember getting my first HD TV in 2006, and I remember Wolf Creek being famously shot in HD, So like that's I know that's kind of the era where it became HD became it came into popular use. So yeah, I can imagine that totally. But we've just completed season 2. That's where me and Sally are up to. And, so that's why you wanted to talk, right?
Yeah, well, I thought it'd be good. Assuming you watch the rest of the show, obviously it'd be great to have you back sort of regularly, and we can break it down like that. So maybe have you back again after you've watched series 3 and 4. And then maybe take series 5 as a whole, and then the sort of long protracted season 6 as a whole. But yeah, you've watched the season 2 finale Funhouse in the last week. Is that right?
Yes, we did. Yeah, it's it's an amazing season. I mean, the whole show has just been as good as you said, and as good as everyone else said. And I actually, my friend Carl, who sadly passed away recently, who was a great film producer and filmmaker. He would go on about Sopranos all the time, and he'd always, as much as you, and he'd always tell me that it was it was a ritual he had every year. He would rewatch it every year, the whole thing. So it always kind of reminds me of him as well, which is nice, because he was a great guy, and a really big influence in terms of film and TV making and interest in. So yeah, doing this one for Carl, man.
R.I.P. Carl. I've rewatched it a lot over the years, and over the sort of 13 years since it ended, and but I don't tend to do all the way through. I've done that like a couple of times with friends and with our mum as well. But I tend to do is like either watch individual episodes, because in some ways it lends itself quite well to that, more so than some other shows that are a bit more intensely serialized, things like Breaking Bad, for example. But the other thing I've done is I do watch like seasons quite a bit. So some of my favorite seasons, easy example, season 5, I have taken them a few times through and just gone right, I'll watch that season, and it's elements of self-containment and things like that. Would you like to, because we'll talk a little bit about season 1 and 2 and kind of your take on them, but like just do you want to talk to the audience just a little bit about your sort of background with kind of gangster TV movies, fiction,
Yeah, well, I mean, probably like everyone else of my generation, I probably saw Goodfellas first. That's probably like the first gangster movie I saw. That was made in 1990, and I watched that pretty young and absolutely loved it. And then I think I went back in time and watched The Godfather, watched Donnie Brasco, and it was always it's kind of seen as a bit of a masculine genre, so I guess it's kind of like most of your boy mates are always talking about it, talking about quoting from gangster movies and stuff like that, and everyone knows the script for The Godfather even before you've seen it, and then Godfather Part 2, which is just completely madly superior to the original, even though it's kind of that alien situation. So yeah, I'm a big fan of gangster movies, and then I kind of knew Sopranos was brilliant because everyone would always tell me it was, but for some reason it was just one of those shows that I guess we got into. Like, I think me and Sally were talking about this the other day. I think the first mini series we got into was Heroes, which was like 2005, 2006. From then we started to get into other stuff, but because Sopranos had kind of pretty much run its course by the time we started getting into watching miniseries, binge watching. So it wasn't something that we were at the sort of inception of. So yeah, it just kind of got put to the wayside, really. Something that I always wanted to watch, and I remember we had this we watched Drive, me and you, and I was saying this is a great film, and then after Drive you were incredibly unimpressed and just put on an episode of The Sopranos to cheer yourself up. I kind of remember that. So I had all these instances of David loves The Sopranos and it's a great show, and I always trust your opinion on stuff, so yeah, finally got round to it, man.
Well, I maintain I was a bit too drunk to appreciate Drive, but which is ironic.
Too drunk to drive.
Too drunk to drive. Yeah, quite.
Bully.
But so the other big difference between our consumption of gangster stuff though is that you've watched the entirety of Boardwalk Empire, and I've seen like 6 episodes maybe.
I love Boardwalk Empire. It's probably out of all the series I've seen, I think it's got the best arc. The best sort of, it really does have that thing in the final episode where you have a pivotal moment for one of the characters where, if this person doesn't go a certain way, the whole series doesn't exist. And I just think it's a brilliant kind of moment like that. And I don't know much about screenwriting or about, like structure and stuff like that, but for me it worked really, really well. And it's a great show. You've started it, haven't you?
Yeah, so I watched like 6 episodes of the first series, I think 6, 7, something like that. And so I've seen like the start of the arc, with Nucky and Margaret and is it Jimmy in that?
Yeah.
And I've met Al Capone, put it that way. And
brilliant! Yeah.
And I think Michael K. Williams as well. Chalky White, is he in that?
He's amazing. Yeah, and there's the bloke who played Zod, in Man of Steel. That actor who's just got the brilliant face.
I'd forgotten he was in it. Yeah, he's like the weird cop guy.
Yeah, the sort of fundamentalist Christian cop. He has some very dark like moments, and that's one of those cases of I can't separate that character from the actor at all. Like I watched Knives Out recently that he was in, which is really great, and it was just him. It was just like you just couldn't you can't unsee that character because he's just so memorable. And but yeah, it's a great show. So yeah, I watched that before I started Sopranos, obviously, because I finished Boardwalk probably about 5 years ago. Whenever it finished, I was watching it in real time, and what a brilliant show, man! Yeah, I recommend that to anybody.
I should say to the listeners, we're going to remain completely spoiler free in this episode because although I've seen all of the Sopranos, Matt, I think without many significant spoilers, has only seen the first 2 series. So this podcast will be for people who've only seen the first 2 series if they want to sort of join in. But it's not a plot spoiler or anything, but don't you, that Steve Buscemi is in the Sopranos later on. I do. Yeah. So that will crop up, but also in the series you're going to watch next, series 3, he directs one of them, and it's actually a very well regarded episode that you'll probably, when you get to it, I think you'll probably be like, oh, that one. You'll have heard of it if you haven't seen it.
Okay. So it's quite a well known in the zeitgeist. It's
probably like top 5 like well known Sopranos episodes. But also it's a directorial. I don't think it was his TV directorial. No, because he directed movies already, hadn't he, and stuff like that. But
just to point out that interestingly, because you couldn't help yourself over the years, you showed me a few pivotal moments and scenes from the show, which out of context, I don't begrudge you because I still can't really remember the details of them. I remember the scenes that you showed me quite well, but I can't remember exactly which characters were involved. That's so good. I know I've got some pretty fucked up shit coming my way.
Yeah, that's good. And I suppose like, at least the kind of tone of it, and like you'll be able to sort of piece those things into the story as you go along, and you'll as you pass them, they'll hopefully be like nice milestones rather than major spoilers in a sense. But
definitely, I think that was fine. And I know I've got some pretty heavy stuff to come.
Yeah. Well, it's let's talk a bit about that first series because I think it was so interesting because Matt has been watching this steadily over the last few months. I dropped in basically for a couple of episodes. So like I watched the premiere, the first episode of the first series, and I watched a few after that, and then I watched like bits and bobs throughout the series, and then I watched the last 2. And then when you've been watching the second series more recently, I sort of popped in and out a bit less constantly. But I joined you guys in sort of like coordinatedly watching the season 2 penultimate episode, and then was very keen for you to get into the finale as soon as possible after that. But yeah, what were your sort of I suppose your initial takes on The Sopranos and on The Sopranos first season in general?
Well, I think it's broadly it's one of those great kind of magic tricks where it's like it's an unseen. I think with great art and especially great movie making and great acting is it's kind of I don't know how to explain it. It's almost like an unseen art form. It's kind of like it's an invisible art. So because basically you are so absorbed in it that you don't even realise and think for a moment that you're watching a fictional show. That's like you're absolutely. That's the way I found it. Was like after an episode and a half, I was just glazed. My eyes were I was just in the show. I was completely invested in every single character. There was no hammy performances, no shots or angles that took me out of it. I just thought this is obviously a great show because I'm enjoying it and I'm not questioning any of it. I'm just going with it and I'm absolutely gripped. Especially with the family stuff, like all those, it's just such a believable family setup in that situation. This like completely unrelatable. It's a completely unrelatable family situation that is very, very relatable. If that makes sense, it's
yeah.
Wonderful.
No, I think I know the sort of thing you mean, especially as we both get a bit older. It's kind of you know, I think we'll talk quite a lot about Tony, obviously, especially in those early seasons, you know, where he's the one, you know, by far the one you know the best. But like, I think as you you know, because I started watching The Sopranos when I was a teenager, you know, mid-teens, and now I am, I guess, like roughly the age, like approaching the age that Tony is when he's introduced at the start of the series. I mean, I don't have kids yet. You know, you're probably already getting to the point where some of that's going to get more relatable in the next few years.
Oh well, this is the thing, isn't it? Because, you know, when you're watching it as a teenager, you're probably seeing it, you know, from his son's perspective more than, you know, he's like, you know, when he gets a scolding for dropping the blueberry pie and stuff. You know, that's a completely different scene. Like, depending on if you're a parent or if you're a teenager, you know, that's what's interesting. Because like when I saw that particular scene, you know, I went, oh, don't be that, oh, you know, I was like, oh, don't be so cruel, you know, like, you know, it was like that moment, you know, don't be so cruel on him, he's just a kid, you know, that kind of moments where as you watch that as a teenager, you would be like, fuck you, dad, you know, that kind of like, you know, it's a completely different perspective. So
it's quite good at, like, even in the first two series, like, it's quite good, The Sopranos, that, like, you know, not like humanizing the entire family. So, like, you know, that Tony and Carmela can be pretty terrible parents, particularly Tony, but, you know, both really. Yeah. But also the kids aren't idealized. You know, it's not like the kids are like innocent. Well, they are, you know, relatively innocent victims because of the way they're being brought up. But they're not always nice people or you know, generous people or insightful people either. You know, they're a product of their family. You know.
Yeah, they're no angels. They have their flaws as well, and which is, you know, but well, it's kind of a miracle that they're as kind of sane as they are, really, you know, as these moments. But, you know, talk about relatability. It's a bit like I rewatched Close Encounters of the Third Kind recently, and I was like, you know, as a new dad, I was like, he gets on the ship and leaves. Like, you know, that's like, you know, that's not cool. Like, you know, that it actually took me out of the action. I was like, that doesn't seem like rational, or like, you know, and it kind of, you know, it was kind of, it was really.
He leaves his family, he leaves his wife and family, and then really leaves his wife and family, doesn't he? That's kind of the
yeah.
progression.
He has a lovely family life. He goes insane, mentally ill. Damaging his family and his kids, and then, like you say, literally puts on a spacesuit and buggers off, and he's completely and doesn't even say, like, you know, tell my kids I love them or anything. He just goes. So yeah,
it's a weird movie that I don't think Close Encounters gets enough weird analysis, because, you know, like Spielberg is kind of lazily sometimes like characterized as like the family friendly director and like the family values, or kind of like, you know, worshipping the family unit and togetherness and stuff like that. You know, that's a weird movie for a guy like that to make, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think even he's come out as saying if I made that movie now, he wouldn't get on the ship. You know, It's kind of like, you know, it's that thing. I was, you know, I guess Spielberg was like 26, 7, like, which is fucking horrible to think, you know, and because when he made Jaws, he was 25, I think. Right, you know, which is like Orson Welles territory, you know. But yeah, I think so. So I guess, you know, at that age he wasn't married, he didn't have kids, as far as I know. So yeah, it's more understandable. But, you know, you think. Yeah, someone who makes blockbuster movies should know better than that. But you know, I mean, that's what makes it interesting, though. You know,
we'll get back onto The Sopranos in a minute. But do you think, in a weird way, that makes Close Encounters Spielberg's Eraserhead? Like, it's his kind of only in the sense that it's his kind of fatherhood escape movie, like weird dark fantasy in some ways, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you know, this ain't gonna be me. I ain't gonna have, like, you know, 2.5 children or whatever, and you know, live in Nevada, lying doing that. Yeah, and
him and David Lynch both got that out of their system in slightly different ways.
And Toby Hooper did it in Poltergeist. Like, if you have a family, this is what happens. Yeah,
this is inevitably what happens.
I have an amazing story to tell you. Can I just tell you a story quickly? Just
absolutely.
Right, so I watched this documentary series on Shudder. It's just come on Shudder, called Cursed Films, and it's about, you know, quote unquote cursed movies like The Exorcist and Poltergeist, where people died on set or very shortly afterwards. And as you probably know, 2 actresses died very shortly after Poltergeist was made. Dominique Dunn, Griffin Dunn's sister, and Heather O'Rourke, who was the little girl who died after the 3rd sequel. And anyway, so it has an interview with the special effects artist who worked on Poltergeist in 1981, 82. And this guy, the interview starts and he says, you know, I find it offensive that people think it's because real skeletons were used on the set of Poltergeist that, you know, caused the death of these 2 actresses. Real skeletons have been used on sets since Frankenstein. You know, we were no different. And I was like, what? You know, I was like, I thought that was just a rumor, because there've been rumors for years that real skeletons have been used, you know, on Texas Chainsaw and Poltergeist and movies like this. And I thought the guy was going to say, like, you know, of course we weren't using real skeletons, you know, like we wouldn't do that. But it was quite the opposite. He was like, every single skeleton that was used was real because it's too expensive to buy plastic ones. You know, and it was just like this moment of absolute. I was just like, what?
They went grave robbing instead because it was too expensive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And like the whole point of the movie is about, like, you know, don't like mess around with the corpses and like disturb them. And there was literally an image of him, you know, like painting latex onto these dead skulls to make them look slightly newly dead. You know, and I was just like, it just blew my mind, because I genuinely thought that couldn't be true. You know, but yeah, this guy just confirmed it. Probably not anymore, I'm guessing, but certainly up to the mid 90s that was the case.
That he's looking into, definitely.
Jesus.
It's interesting we touched on you know, the issues of kind of directors and creators of this stuff, you know, and how they work their own kind of life anxieties into stuff, because the creator of The Sopranos, who's kind of become one of the most revered TV, you know, showrunners, creators in the history of the medium, you know, David Chase, he made The Sopranos. So I think he was developing it. I think I'm right in saying he was developing this as a feature film. He was developing The Sopranos as a feature film in a sort of, you know, much different form, obviously. But the core of it as a feature film would have been not only Tony, you know, or whatever the character would have been called, seeing a psychiatrist, but also the relationship with his mother, with Livia.
Okay.
Because these are both things. I don't know the details about David Chase and his mother, but I know that the two things he wanted to work into the show were his own experiences of therapy and his own, quote, problematic relationship with his mother.
Right.
I can't imagine she's as bad as Livia. I mean, you know, at least not not in the world she inhabits, maybe, you know. But
yeah, you'd like to think it was an exaggerated version. So it was basically analyze this.
Well, there's a joke about that, isn't there? We'll get on to season 2, but when Tony is seeing a therapist at the beginning of season 2 that isn't Melfi.
Yeah.
The therapist is like, you know, like, well, you know what? No, Mrs. Soprano, I know who you are. You know, I've seen Analyze This. I know what this is like. And he's
yeah, they actually reference
and Tony's like, Analyze This? It's a fucking movie.
He's
bemused that anyone should think it's like a real thing, you know, relatable or anything.
That's so meta as well, isn't it? You know, when they talk about movies, it's a bit like in Fight Club, where you know, Brad Pitt says, you know, we all think we're going to grow up to be movie stars, but we ain't. You know, like that kind of like moment. Yeah. But that was quite a kind of a jarring moment. How great is Malfi, by the way?
Oh yeah, well, you know, I actually want to talk a little bit about Goodfellas, because obviously Lorraine Bracco as Dr. Melfi is one of the actors who carries across from Goodfellas, as is what's he called, Michael Imperioli, who plays Tony's nephew Christopher. He's obviously got a pretty small role in Goodfellas compared to her as Spider, the kid who gets shot in the foot. But he's in it, and as you go through the Sopranos, you'll recognise a whole bunch of other, you know, major or minor actors from Goodfellas. You know, they certainly re-employ them, you know, in the sort of gangster fiction world. One thing, when I was watching the first episode of The Sopranos with, you know, in tandem with you guys a couple of months ago now, I hadn't seen it in a few years, and one thing that I was sort of braced for was the 90s-ness of it, you know, like not only the sort of like now 90s period setting of it, you know, but as I say, like the style of TV of that era, it's not really, it's pushing at the boundaries of it, but it's not really outgrown it, you know, not that it should do, you know, because it's from that era, but, you know, it looks like, as I say, like prestige 90s TV, you know, but it's very much of that late 90s era. But one thing I realised just when thinking it over a little bit about what to say to you tonight is, you know, in that first episode, it opens with Tony going to Melfi's office, and so it's, you know, it literally is like a guy walks into a psychiatrist's office, you know, and he's introduced to Melfi, and she starts talking to him about his life, and he starts talking about his life, and then they play that voiceover over clips that introduce his world. So what the Sopranos pilot cribs from Goodfellas a little bit, in the sense that it finds a kind of quasi-believable way for Tony to be doing voiceover over scenes of introducing his family, like all these two families, you know, his crime family, his real family. Yeah. And it borrows that from Goodfellas, and it kind of makes the pilot palatable, doesn't it? Because, you know, he's like, take my nephew, Christopher, for example, and you meet Christopher, you know, and it's kind of, it's something that the show never does after that first episode. And that's where it departs from Goodfellas. I was talking to Rich, I was up in Edinburgh with Rich the other day, and I was talking to him about how weird it would be if you took the movie Goodfellas and you did an edit where you just take out all the voiceover.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be really kind of, it'd be like Friends without the laugh track. It'd be like, you know, really strange, like just loads of silences. It could work though, I guess. I don't know. No, No,
I'm
no.
very interested to see it, because the only two characters who do voiceover in Goodfellas are Henry, obviously the most of it, and Lorraine Bracco as well, right? They're the two characters who do that, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to think. I guess it'd be a problem if the dialogue isn't all there. You know, for example, like if in the edit they'd actually, you know, not put in, you know, for example, the scene where he says she needs to get a hat or whatever, and she goes, "A hat?" You know, in response, like if they didn't have the corresponding line, it would sound
true,
strange. Yeah. But
it's kind of works as call as response style voiceover in a way like that sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it'd be really interesting to edit those scenes together and do it without because I'm sure that on the track all the Foley and the background noise is all there, so that'd be really, really strange actually. Like, yeah, just put those scenes together.
Actually, I've just thought the scenes that'd be weirdest, the scenes where you couldn't really get away with it would be the ones where it freeze frames. You know, like where he freeze frames, he's just talking over it. It would just literally just freeze for about 20 seconds.
Yeah, just like shutting the bonnet of the car and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but I suppose there's some iconic scenes in Goodfellas that wouldn't be that affected, like the one where he's taking her into the nightclub through the kitchen. You know.
Oh, what a shot that is, man! Like, how great is that? That's like one of the best movie shots of all time. Yeah. Apparently, they did it. They had to do. They did it like 3 or 4 times, and like the comedian at the end, like always kept fluffing his line. You know, the stand up who's on stage, like would always just go, hey, oh, like, they'd get it wrong, and that was like. So I think they got it on the 3rd or 4th take, but it took like all night to do it, which is a bit, but it's so worth it.
What was watching the first series of The Sopranos? What was your kind of because I know you've seen him in a couple of things before in minor stuff, but like what was your sort of initial take on James Gandolfini? Because I'm a bit of a fanboy really.
He's remarkable. I mean, like but I knew that because I'd seen him in The Man Who Wasn't There is probably the film that I know him from the most. Trying to think what else I would know him from. Mind, was he in early Coen Brothers movies as well? I'm trying to think like what else I would have seen him in.
He's in he's famously in True Romance. The scene that he gets mostly with
yeah. But I mean, I suppose I remember him in that now, but like I wouldn't have known him that well.
Yeah, I've seen him in the Odds and Ends. Like he did a romantic comedy in the latter few years of his life with Julia Louis-Dreyfus and things like that. But I've not particularly sought out. I'm not like a completist of his, although I love him to bits, because I think in a sense I'm still kind of mourning The Sopranos a bit too much. I'm a bit too close to it, as a fan.
What year did he pass away?
He passed away in, I think, 2012 or 13. It was, several, at least 5 or 6 years, I think, after The Sopranos ended. So he had done a few other film projects and stuff like that. He hadn't, he'd done some TV production stuff as well. I think he produced like a documentary or two. Did a lot of film festival stuff, Yeah. So all I was thinking was, it's interesting that The Sopranos uses that kind of Goodfellas crutch of the introductory voiceover in that first episode, and then leaves it behind. It's just one of the kind of many ways in which I think one of the ways in which these first 2 series of The Sopranos are interesting is that it does kind of outgrow its influences. Arguably, it kind of. It stops being what you might call the TV Goodfellas. Or I don't think it was ever that, but it kind of it doesn't need those crutches anymore. It doesn't need those influences and that style. It develops perhaps a slower, more melancholy style of its own.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, it really finds its feet. I mean, like I think most shows do, like in the sort of second season, especially. But this one, like you said, it had a huge shadow to escape. And I think it did it really, really well, and it does become its own thing very, very quickly.
One of the things about it, as you go through it, actually, I think you'll see more and more, Matt, is like it doesn't really hold your hand much on that stuff. Like it drops you into quite complicated gangster environments and families and like long-rooted families, and it doesn't really give you a lot of stuff like that Goodfellas actually, in retrospect, walks you through quite carefully. Goodfellas will tell you stuff in captions and voiceover, and Henry will introduce you to characters, quite thoroughly, quite succinctly, but quite thoroughly. Sopranos, after that first episode, doesn't really do that. Yes, it can sometimes be a bit of a struggle to catch up with. Of course, Sopranos nerds like me love that because it's a bit of a challenge as well. Like kind of naming all the obscure capos and things like that. It can be quiz, literally quiz material. Apart from James Gandolfini in these first couple of series, have any of the other actors kind of stood out for you at this stage? Do you think?
Well, me and Sal absolutely love the guy who plays. Oh God, what's his name? Silvio, is it? He's just so he's like a pantomime gangster, but he's but he is brilliant, and we've seen him do like pretty messed up stuff, so he means business, but he's just such a weirdly lovable character. as well. And and it's weird that kind of how it.
Do you know what his background is?
No, I've been so curious because I said to Sal, like, there's no way this guy can either he's a real gangster in real life, or he's got to play gangsters for the rest of his life. I can't imagine him doing anything else.
So that's so interesting. So he's called Stevie Van Zandt, and he wasn't really I think I'm right in saying he wasn't really an actor before The Sopranos, and he is the long running since the mid '70s guitarist in Bruce Springsteen's band.
No way.
Yeah.
No way. That's crazy.
So look, I think you, like me, are not a big Bruce Springsteen fan at all.
No.
But if you look at any footage, watch any Bruce Springsteen video or concert clip, you will 90% of them you will see Silvio standing next to Bruce Springsteen, usually wearing a bandana, just playing guitar. It's amazing. When I first found that out, I was just
dude, I am just leaving the podcast for a moment just to tell Sal.
yeah, certainly.
Silvio, the guy, the pantomime gangster guy from Goodfellas, from Sopranos. Yes, before Sopranos, he wasn't an actor. He was Bruce Springsteen's guitarist. So if you watch old music videos, from the 70s, 80s, 90s, he stood next to Bruce Springsteen on guitar. How mad is that?
And I should say he still is as well.
And he still is to this day. Yeah. Say again. Is that the only acting he's done?
He's done little bits of stuff since after The Sopranos, but mostly gangster or Silvio tributes, basically. And he basically that was his first acting gig, I think.
That's amazing, first acting gig. Wow, that's crazy, man. I know it's obviously here we are back on station. Obviously there's a lot of networks in Hollywood and stuff, but someone just clearly just saw him and said, Bruce Springsteen's guitarist. He looks like the baddest gangster that ever was.
Yes, he's a remarkable looking guy.
Hey, so what? I've been going a long time. Let me hear it.
Just when they thought I was out, they pull me back in. All right, Kay. Just this one time, I'll let you ask me about my affairs. Is it true, Michael? No. You fucking skiffles. Our true enemy has yet to reveal himself.
He's on a roll.
The other, probably most obviously unconventional casting choice in The Sopranos is equally ridiculous. Paulie, the older guy with the white flecked hair.
He's great as well. Yeah.
So he'd been a more established actor, but he was in the early mid '70s. He was genuine. At the same time, Stevie Van Zandt was starting to play with Bruce Springsteen. So he was what's he called? Tony Sirico. He's called. Tony Sirico was a gangster. Tony Sirico was involved in New York organized crime and was basically a bit like Paulie, a low-level mafia soldier. So I think he did some jail time. He cleaned up. He took acting classes and became that. But everyone talks about Tony Sirico as being ridiculously like Paulie and just obviously not a violent man anymore and stuff, but just ridiculously short-tempered and grumpy and kind of quick to anger and just kind of the most ridiculous man in the world, but kind of with an edge to him.
Well, that's really interesting because I wonder if the Chris character is kind of based on him. Sort of trying to leave the life behind and become a screenwriter and become an actor. That's not coincidence, surely.
Maybe partly so. That I've been listening to this. I'll put a link in the show notes, but I've been listening to this podcast that the actor. So you've met both these actors already. So Michael Imperioli, who plays Christopher, and I'll forget. I'll put his name in afterwards. But the guy who plays Bob, Fat Bobby, that you've already met, the one who kind of looks after Junior and stuff like that. He's like Junior's
yeah. He's always finishing people's meals. Yeah.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah. So those two do a podcast now, and it's the only reason I haven't sent you episodes is it's full of spoilers. They're just spoiling it all over the place. But they're talking about it. They're having people on. They're talking about their experiences, and I think so many actors, certainly those two, but so many actors brought their own experiences to the table in terms of influencing the Sopranos characters or allowing the writers to do that. Michael Imperioli, for example, was a budding and practicing TV writer and has continued to write TV and stuff. And obviously you get those Christopher already in those first two seasons. He's trying to do that, isn't he, to varying degrees of lack of success.
Yeah.
So, they do a fair bit of mockery of TV and Hollywood and stuff as well, don't they? There's a few episodes in there where they at least touch on that and showbiz.
It's all very meta.
Yeah, it is. So as well as being indebted to gangster tradition stuff, they kind of have an awareness of what they're doing and the sort of limits they're pushing at. I talking about the older cast members, particularly in that first series, there's a real focus on Tony's, I suppose, in two slightly different ways, growing out from underneath the older generation, isn't he? Because in terms of his gangster, well, they're both family, but in terms of his gangster life, he's growing out of the shadow of Uncle, of Uncle Junior, literally to lead the family. But also his mother Livia is hovering over him and is threatening him and holding him back in other ways. And obviously those two plot lines actually are quite unified, aren't they? Because they both form a sort of desperate alliance to contain him, basically, which fails.
Yeah, and it's all the sort of what time do you put the gun down? What time do you stop? In life, do you stop trying to be number one and pass the torch? It's like that kind of weird crux point of your life. I think Uncle Junior is actually one of my favourite characters.
Yeah, he's great
in the show. He's just, that performance is brilliant, and he sort of has that tremendous power that's kept in check as well. Do you know what I mean? Like that kind of real aggression, and he kind of looks to me like an evil Larry David.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting you say that. Yeah, that may come up later in the show.
Oh, you can't do that.
I won't spoil that bit for you.
Okay.
He's a great actor. He has a small role in The Godfather too. So in terms of acting pedigree, that is right up there, I think. But
wow, he must have been young.
Yeah. I mean, Dominic Chianese, he's called. He's such a great actor, and also Uncle Junior is kind of the primary antagonist along with Livia of that first season. But he's such an unconventionally threatening guy. He's not he's this kind of dweeby looking old, slightly built Italian guy. And but he can be genuinely threatening in that first series as well. Especially the power he commands, obviously. But he's always partly a figure of fun. I think one thing The Sopranos as well, all the way up to Tony, is these women as well, but these largely men are terrifying and venal and fascinatingly dark, but also almost always ridiculous.
Well, very infantile as well. That's what I kind of like about them. There's a sort of a charm about them. They've just never grown past a certain point of maturity in a weird way. They kind of are quite infantile. So that's how because obviously that's the problem with gangster movies, is how do you have any sympathy? How do you relate to the characters? How do you sort of have empathy? And it's because they're not fully formed human beings, really. That's the kind of one way that you kind of have to have some pity for them in that respect, and I think it does that really, really well.
Yeah, and I think there's something about that in because we've talked many times about Goodfellas, and because I know people who not many, but some people who just can't get into things like Goodfellas because it's full of scumbags, basically, because it's full of people that you can't really much relate to, or they can't anyway, and they find them unpleasant, and venal and selfish and short-sighted and violent, and and they're right, but they can also be tremendously charismatic and amusing, obviously, Tommy in Goodfellas is a great example of that, including that scene, the iconic scene. But I think there's something in The Sopranos and
the scene where Henry comes begging to Paulie at the end of Goodfellas, and is weeping and asking for money and for sort of forgiveness as well. That is that's almost as difficult as the bit where he fingers him in court. It's just that kind of it really is love. He really does love him. Because he doesn't kill him, but he gives him just this sort of real kind of pity payoff. At the end, and it's just that's a great scene.
Well, it's like Henry in Goodfellas is a pathetic man, but these people like Paulie and like Jimmy are the father figures he's had. Really, his own father fades into the background so quickly, and you realise that in itself is a pretty pitiable position to be in for everyone involved.
Yeah, and the hearts are just broken, as well, quite easily. There's so much loyalty and so much kind of like brotherhood in it. My favourite scene in the in both series combined is where the T-1000 is sleeping at the sporting goods store.
Robert Patrick, and and Tony sort of hears him snoring in a tent or whatever. He's sleeping. He can't go home, and he wakes him up and he goes, hey, what the fuck you doing here? And he goes I can't go home. Here I can get some sleep. And he goes, and Tony says something to the effect of, I envy you.
You know, 'cause he's like, "What are you talking about? I'm bankrupt. Like, I'm ruined." He goes, "Yeah, but you can do anything after that. You know, you're free." You know, I'd love that scene, because it was like that's how Tony really feels trapped in this life. He is trapped. You know, whereas Robert Patrick may be, divorced and bankrupt and never see his son ever again, but at least he's a free man. Tony's envious of him. You know, I thought that was a brilliant exchange.
That's so good, because I hadn't remembered that bit, but that's so wonderful, isn't it? Because it's so sincere, and it's maybe the nearest Tony comes to like being sweet and empathetic to a friend. But he's also it's also got that sort of indifference of, you know, when you've had a bad breakup or something and your friends are like, "Oh, plenty more fish in the sea." They essentially want to end the conversation, you know. But it's also got Tony basically caused it, like, or at least encouraged it, and, you know, poured lighter fluid on the situation, and, you know, he's just not. The nearest he can come to empathy is this, you know. I
think he might I might be making this up, but I'm pretty sure he says, I did you a favour. I'm almost sure he says something along those lines, at least, you know, like, you know, "I did you a favour, you prick," you know, or something like that. You know,
almost any Tony scene is millimeters away from self-pity kicking in. And anger, you know, like, but basically that's, you know, if his generosity is slightly rejected or curbed, you know, it's kind of that's the kind of character it is. And they actually do a really good job in these early seasons, don't they, of pinning that to not just Livia, who's very much that kind of character. You know, you the more Tony hates her and rejects her and is infuriated and hurt by her, you know, the more you see that there's a lot of her in him. It's not his fault, you know, but there's a lot of her in him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, cause and effect, and you know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, Olivia, she never really fully shows her cards. That's what I love about that character. You as an audience, you still don't really know exactly what she's about. You know, by the end of even by the end of the second season.
That moment of Livia in the hospital at the end of series 1. You know, when Tony goes into, he's decided, you know, he's uncovered her role, her like quite crucial part after the FBI playing that tape of goading Junior essentially into trying to have him assassinated. And he goes to the hospital and he picks up that pillow off the tray, and, you know, it's very clear he's going straight to a hotel room to smother her. But that's apparently, I think I might be wrong, but I think that's what the film version of The Sopranos was going to end with. That's how that was going to end, with a son smothering his own mother. And to turn it into a series, that's one of the things that, you know, got diluted. But in a way, it's almost more chilling, isn't it? Because, like, you know, at least that might have her as like a slightly helpless figure, you know, and him doing this kind of terrible kind of Oedipal thing. But actually, she's got sort of got the upper hand again, and that scene where he's coming after her, and she's like, you know,
even though she's had like the stroke or whatever, like, you know.
But you see her grinning through that oxygen mask, and he's like, she's smiling. He's like she's like being dragged away, you know, and she's like, she is smiling. You don't know if it's voluntary or not, but she is smiling at him, you know.
Matricide is the most unbearable crime of all, especially unbearable for the son who commits it.
What's that quote from? I don't remember that.
Psycho.
Oh, of course, yeah, great connection.
I literally was saying that in my head as soon as he picked up the pillow. That quote just went through my head.
Yeah, well, she is a kind of it's an interesting connection to make, isn't it? Because she is kind of a Norma Bates kind of figure, you know, who clearly lives, you know, not in the kind of psycho voiceover way, but clearly lives in Tony's head rent free, as they say. You know, and even in the second series where she's in it less, which was partly because the actress was quite ill during the second series. But even in the second series when she's in it less and they have fewer scenes together, she just dominates so much of his psyche. You can tell, you know, and he's even in avoiding her, he is being held back by her, you know.
Yeah, she controls in her absence. She controls in presence. Like, she's not going anywhere anytime soon, especially psychologically.
Of course, yeah, and of course in that second series she controls him through Janice as a sort of proxy. You know, like when his sister returns, you know, she becomes. Everyone recruits different henchmen in The Sopranos, don't they? You know, for their emotional or physical needs, and Janice becomes a sort of henchwoman to Livia. You know. Without meaning to. I just wanted to, before we move on, we'll have a little break, but then we'll talk a little bit more about the second series, because there's so much to cover in all this. But what I remember before you watched the first series, I was saying, wait till you get to college, which is the 5th episode. That's the one where Tony goes on the trip with Meadow to check out the college that she's applying to, and simultaneously spots the guy who ratted on them years ago and is in witness protection now. That was, I think, even when The Sopranos was being quite well reviewed, you know, but like that was like the kind of breakout hit episode, basically. And that was for a lot of people that was early viewers.
Yeah, that's when everyone started paying attention.
Yeah, and I think that's partly because it just illustrates, it's almost like the one you could explain the premise of that, as I just did, and go, oh, I get what the show is. It's the guy dealing with the family life and also the family, the capital F family life. And it's the first one where it really spreads its wings and shows you that in one episode, isn't it?
It was superb. Yeah,
I was just going to say it's also got the subplot of Carmela, of course, which is I think probably her biggest kind of real substantial stuff in that, at least in that first series. And it's probably where you get to see that Edie Falco is going to, probably successfully go toe to toe with James Gandolfini for the rest of the series as well, because she's great.
Yeah. So was that the priest sleeping over sort of thing?
That's the one, Father Phil. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really strange. I wasn't sure about that really. I thought it was a bit of a very strange subplot. Or it was kind of I wasn't quite sure what they were going for with that, and knowing now that it doesn't really carry on, or it certainly doesn't go. I'm not sure if that was a bit of a dead end really, but I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I suppose it's illustrating her frustration, isn't it? It's giving her a bit more time to just show how kind of trapped she is by her suburban mob housewife thing, where she's actually quite isolated, really, isn't she? I mean, she has a few friends and stuff, but it doesn't really seem to be able to relate to them very well. And, obviously Tony treats her largely abysmally, not just his affairs, but, just is not emotionally open to her at all, really, except for except probably when he's at his most evil. He's probably most open to her when they're actually discussing, murders and hits and body disposal.
He comes home pissed. He's like, I didn't kill anyone. That's a great scene. But he's, the price for him holding back is getting obliterated. He has a drink.
Well,
himself.
And he's also still self-congratulating himself, right? Like that deserves a medal.
Yeah. Oh God, I love him.
Yeah, I kind of do too, and I really shouldn't. But that episode, they when he kills the informant, he garrots the informant. After that kind of tense sort of cat and mouse game. That was another bit that they had serious conversations about back in the day, because obviously it was 1999. They hadn't really done this thing where you essentially have this sociopathic villain at the center of your show, and there were big debates over whether to make that another thing where he basically lets it go, where he Meadow looks at him, or maybe he decides just to let the guy drive off, or then they go, oh, close call for that guy, he doesn't realize how lucky he got. But they were like, David Chase and the writers of that episode were just like, no, he has to kill him. Like, this is, we're going to try and make something different here, and this has to be the moment.
Yeah, there's no, it's too early for redemption. It's not like we're not there yet. We need to show what these guys are really about, because it's also, you need to know what your protagonists are capable of as well. You need to set the bar, and that's the bar set, pretty early on. What Tony's capable of, because then and then after he, like as you say, he grabs the pillow, Jesus Christ, I mean, the bar is, he's not even on the radar screen.
He can do this. He can do this. Yeah.
Exactly.
No, it's important. And obviously he tries, he's basically ready to have Junior killed at the end of the show as well, even though he doesn't succeed in doing that before he's arrested. Well, let's as I say, always some more to talk about, but let's take a little few minute break, and then we'll come back and talk a bit more about where it goes in season 2 and kind of where that builds up to, and because I think there's some extraordinary episodes in season 2, and I think we probably need to talk about those.
Awesome, dude.
When I was 17, I drank some very good beer. I drank some very good beer I purchased with a fake ID. My name was Brian McKee. I stayed up listening to Queen when I was 17.
Okay, so welcome back, and me and Matt are just going to have a quick chat about The Sopranos season 2, because obviously Matt's just finished watching that. I think you've watched all of that over the course of the last sort of 3-4 weeks, something like that.
Yeah, we've been keeping it up, so we've binged through it all actually, and we just couldn't help ourselves. It's brilliant.
One thing that's interesting about The Sopranos season 2 is it's kind of got that difficult second album thing, but in a specific way, that they would take a real gamble with The Sopranos in general, and they didn't really think, I think more so than some other shows, they didn't really think they were going to get to make another season. The first season is sort of designed to be their mission statement almost. As I say, it grew out of a film sort of spec and stuff. I remember, I think the creators and the writers have talked about how they basically spend the first portion of the second season reconstructing the show, almost like kind of like working out what on earth they do next.
Yeah.
And actually on rewatching it,
we're going to carry on with this thing.
Yeah, this is a show, is it? Yeah, okay.
Because
I think you do get that in the first few episodes, don't you? Because you kind of you get basically it's about getting Melfi back to town, getting her back on speaking terms with Tony, Janice, his sister, coming in, and as I say, becoming a kind of conduit for Livia in some ways, but also just another thorn in Tony's side and a kind of illustration of some of the more of the family stuff that means a lot to him. But also, and then I think about episode 3, you get Richie Aprile coming out of prison, and he forms the kind of, I guess he, in some ways he's the Uncle Junior equivalent in this second series. He's the mafia threat basically. He's the kind of the big bad of this series. So they do spend that putting the series back together in a sense. It's interesting. I love that. I love that montage that opens the first episode of the second series. The one set to "It Was a Very Good Year" by Sinatra that reintroduces all the characters.
Yeah, it's brilliant. They've certainly got the soundtrack down in this thing. Like, they use music so well.
Yeah, it's so lovingly done, that, isn't it? And it lets you see all the characters being essentially quite terrible and venal, and you kind of reintroduce them in their awful element. I think the other thing that you get, which the first series doesn't exactly wrap up, but it teases you. I think this is a kind of lost thread. Is we haven't really talked about Pussy in the first series.
Yeah, that was a strange jump, I thought, and I wasn't quite sure if I'd kind of missed something. But now that you mention it being like, a sort of a series, they didn't think they were going to possibly get a second series. That they didn't need to kind of tie up all the loose ends. But yeah, because essentially Puss basically goes missing, doesn't he, at the end of the first series? And they realise
he kind of misses the whole climax of the first series in a way.
Yeah, and we're just led to think that's just consequential. That's just a coincidence. There's no there's no connection with him being a rat or anything like that, because obviously they found the rat, and they got rid of the rat. So so that was kind of interesting. So like when Puss comes back, it's kind of like, even as us as the audience don't really know where he's been.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, apparently actually David Chase, he didn't really think it mattered. Like, he wanted to carry on with the second season of The Sopranos and just like maybe explain away in a line where Pussy went, or it not to be a big deal. And apparently the nascent fandom and nerddom building up around The Sopranos was like there were entire like message boards about what the hell's happened to Pussy and like what's going to happen to Pussy.
Wow.
And he had to have it explained to him and like talked into him by some of the other writers, like, people care about this, like we can't just leave this.
Yeah, you're not going to get away with it. Wow, that's the kind of the origin of the sort of the fandom having real influence over products, isn't it?
Well, it started there, yeah. Certainly in terms of like kind of prestige TV like that. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I'd say that the second series is not one of my favourites, but I think it has extraordinary episodes in it. It's one of those seasons that has maybe high points without being very consistent. But I love, all the stuff around Pussy is great, isn't it? Like he is for what was kind of an afterthought for the creators. He's just, the actor's really good, and the character is just, because as I say, spoilers up to the end of the second series, obviously, it reveals quite quickly that Pussy is an FBI informant and is working for them and is feeding them mostly useless information and is getting manipulated by them a bit and high-hatted by them a little bit. But he is a threat to Tony, and Tony remains consciously oblivious of it for most of the season.
Yeah, and I sort of do believe him. When he said he was doing it to save his own skin, obviously, but he wasn't actually feeding them vindictive information. Like, he was kind of cushioning the blow a bit for the gangsters. I think I think he was holding back. So in my mind, he does redeem him a little bit. Because I know that they had him, but you did feel like he was still kind of on Tony's side.
Yeah, well, of course, then you run into very quickly, don't you? It's funny that you end up talking all this stuff about The Sopranos, and then you realise you're like saying you're defining being good as being on Tony's side. It's like, but you have so much affection for the characters that you can kid yourself into thinking in the same way Pussy does, really. Like, because that's basically a season-long arc of a character tying himself in absolute torturous knots, trying to make his situation justifiable. Anything about it,
Yeah, absolutely. That is a great character, and it's one that you do have a lot of empathy for. And but also I quite like the fact that you don't see how it came to this as well. You don't see how Pussy got caught, or like any of this kind of stuff. It's just kind of a given. One of my favorite scenes, favorite characters is Richie as well. I think Richie is terrifying. He's just like a personification of pure evil. And when you hear that he's getting with Janice, you're just kind of like, you totally deserve each other.
Yeah, those kind of sunken eyes, and they kind of make a point, don't they, of like he's not just that he's a shorter actor, but they don't really try and hide it. Like the scenes when James Gandolfini's looming over him, and James Gandolfini's pretty scary, but like Richie Aprile manages to remain scary, even though he's like, it's like a foot taller than shorter than Tony,
That's the genius of it, isn't it? He carries just so much in his expression and his eyes, and again you see what he's capable of early on when he just runs that guy over for very little reason, and just just it ruins his life. He doesn't even mercy kill him. He leaves him a paraplegic. It's just terrible.
Yeah, he's meant to be a lovely dude, that actor, as well. I mean, they kind of say that about everyone involved in the show, but he just sounds really, really mild-mannered and lovely and charming, and he just just this actors that can play psychopaths extremely well. It's great that I think
he's just got that kind of look about him.
I think the second series' biggest strength is it ties together these relatively disparate storylines maybe a bit more closely ultimately than the first series does. The first series is telling a more direct story, but this has quite complicated things going on that are actually drawn together quite well as the season progresses, especially in those last two episodes, which we'll talk about in a sec. Before that, did you enjoy the episode where they go to Italy?
Oh, that was superb! Yeah, it was brilliant. Not just for the food and the wine, but it was that felt like almost like a film plot. That felt very because I think that obviously they had much more interesting set pieces and interesting scenery and stuff that felt more film-like in general. But then having that sort of female mafioso boss as well there, and that felt like a whole kind of plot, film plot within itself. So it was brilliant.
It's like the joke in Extras, isn't it, about doing running out of ideas, so doing the holiday episode.
Yeah, exactly. But they nailed it. And Chris in the room, sort of like just shooting up as soon as he gets there and missing all the sightseeing and all that kind of stuff. Like, you really learn who people are, don't you?
Paulie being really, really looking forward to getting the kind of piazza kind of respect and everything from the old men, like Commendatore, and they're just completely ignoring him.
Yeah, and he gets really pissed off and he's great.
Yeah, Tony Sirico being like hurt or bemused, hurt or annoyed by anything is just comic gold in The Sopranos. Like, it's just amazing.
Yeah, that's a weird kind of thing. As I was saying before, they kind of have this weird switch between like hyper masculine and super infantile at the same time, like a really weird blend.
They've all got such fragile egos, haven't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the playground thing, and I think The Sopranos. I was going to mention this when we talked about the first series, but The Sopranos has that. Maybe the reason that gangsters are so relatable, especially for maybe a lot of like male audience members watching them, is you kind of have that playground memory of like we've talked before about how like childhood is romanticized a lot. Quite a lot of especially playground childhood is like survival of the fittest, isn't it? It's quite horrible, really. It's quite dog eat dog, everyone out for themselves. No one really has the confidence to step up for anyone else. So like the Sopranos actually does that thing like a lot of gangster films do of having these child men, but it's that gang thing, isn't it? Literally of like these guys haven't grown up and they're scary for it because now they've got guns and they can run you over and things like that,
yeah,
or just destroy your life through money.
Well, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, that's the fear, isn't it? Because that's the thing that Matt and Trey talk about, in their South Park characters, saying that like 8-year-olds are not sweet and innocent and angelic. They're selfish, self-serving, homicidal maniacs, and it's like you've got to kind of, you grow up and hopefully you become other. But The Sopranos, those characters never grow up, and that's why they're terrifying.
Oh, definitely, and it always remains funny as a show, but darkly funny, but and successfully, I think, and you always find some charm in the characters. But it's no spoiler to say that most of the rest of The Sopranos just takes you methodically through how awful these guys are and how they're sexism, misogyny, anger towards everyone, sociopathy, selfishness, prejudice. Everything about them is just terribly, terribly damaging for them and everyone around them. That's the theme. Settle in.
I absolutely loved my favorite scene from season 2. I think is the way Uncle Junior just decides in a millisecond that Richie's got to go. I just thought that's like in the Matrix they say like the robots, the machines decided our fate in a nanosecond. I love that. Yeah. I love that about Junior. He's just like no, he's got to go. I got to go with Tony.
He couldn't sell it. He was like bemused, isn't he? He's like he tried to engineer this coup again, and he's just like, no. He kind of nopes out. It's like someone cashing out on a bad bet or something. He's just like, no, I've followed this enough. Like going further after this would be chucking good money after bad.
Yeah, he's not fucking around. He's been doing this for decades. Like he knows, like he doesn't, sort of compromise or come to terms. He's just like, no, he's got to go. And then the way he does end up going is nothing short of a red wedding.
Oh my god! So this is the episode. So it's called The Knight in White Satin Armor, the penultimate episode, and this is one of these episodes that gave The Sopranos help with this. That gave HBO format shows the reputation for the penultimate one being the big sting. This is kind of starting to emerge here because this is the year 2000. This one comes out, but this one was one I watched simultaneously with you, Matt, and it was I was just gleeful because so much is happening in that episode. As the Richie sort of plotline comes to a boil, and they go all around the houses, don't they? Because there's Janice and Richie's wedding coming up, and there's all sorts of stuff going on around that, preparations for that, and business deals flowing in and out of the plot, and you meet Richie's presumed homosexual son. Who Janice kind of has a lot of time for, and Richie less so. And they just set up all this stuff. Some of it's been brewing all season. It's like a pressure cooker, and like Janice and Tony's history of like parental violence and things like that, and Janice's like past relationships and Richie's violence that Janice is able to subsume. And they talked about the sort of rough sex they have with a gun. That's been set up that there's a gun in the house, and she's not adverse to wielding it, and he isn't. And that moment towards the end of the episode when Richie's on the way out anyway, but what actually happens is he pushes Janice too far.
Yeah, it was superb, and I really didn't see it coming at all. I really didn't, and it was just it was a wonderful ending. And the way I swear Sally didn't think so when we watched the scene, but I swear when Tony breaks into the house to come and help Janice, he's got a smirk on his face. Yeah, and I just think that I saw it in the shadows, and I'm like, that made me bawl with laughter. Like I was just like, because Tony's just in that moment, like, hey, this worked out well.
Well, there's so much going on, isn't there? Because there's this worked out well. I didn't have to do it. There's the kind of Janice is now as bad as me. There's the kind of She tells like because Livia's upstairs and Janice tells him, he's like, what's where's Ma, and Janice is like, well, Janice basically like admits that she drugged it to her so she'd sleep through it, and it's like not sleep through the murder because she didn't plan it, but like just sleep through the night, let her and Richie have a romantic evening, whatever. And Tony like seems to get a kind of kick, like he's both like horrified and gets a bit of a kick out of that as well, like
because she's not this perfect carer that she claimed to be, you see that she's cutting corners and everything, and I mean, talk about an encompassing moment. It encompasses all of those things, and plus it's going to make Janice easier to get rid of because she feels guilty, so she's going to flee town. He's not going to have to explain it to her, or or not, or convince her it wasn't them, or
he doesn't have to go to their wedding anymore as well.
Exactly. Yeah. We all know that feeling's great. So it's perfect.
I love that scene in that episode. Towards the end of that episode when he's putting Janice on the bus back out west, and she's asking about because she's still kind of like, in a very Janice way, she's still kind of a little bit in love with Richie, or thinks she is. Yeah. And she's like, what did you do to what did you do to him? Where do you lay it to rest? He's like, he's resting. He's on this lovely hill. And there's daisies and there's birds singing. And she's like, what do you think we did, Janice? It's like.
Yeah. Don't ask me that. What do you think we did with the body? Yeah. That again made me laugh so much. Like it was just like absolutely brilliant. It was like that Tiny Tim line, wasn't it? Like he's on the hill where you can see the ducks on the water. Shit, like, what do you think this is? It's like it's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
It's like Tony's very capable of holding on to sentimentality, but when Janice is the one trying to do it, he's just not having it. She does not get to be that person.
Yeah, he's the only one who gets to be sentimental. Yeah.
Yeah, darkly sentimental, indulgently sentimental.
Janice, is that you down there? What are you doing up so early?
Ma, go back to bed.
I just don't know what happened to me. I had the strangest dreams all night long. People coming and going, coming and going. I couldn't get up off the bed.
Tony.
Anthony, what are you doing here?
Nothing. Come on, Janice, let's go. Richie didn't come home last night. She's worried about him.
Oh, sure. He probably jilted her. That's the story of her life.
What kind of a fucking chance did she have with you as her mother? You're always nagging her about her weight. She goes out on a date, she comes home, you call her a fucking tramp.
I'm on the way out in the car.
I never said anything of the kind.
I heard you.
You make things up. You tell me. Now you tell me when I ever did anything to any of you.
You don't know, do you? You don't have a fucking clue.
I wasn't always perfect, but I always tried to do the best I could. And I know you didn't. Any of you didn't like it when I tried to tell you what to do. Babies are like animals. They're no different than dogs. Somebody has to teach them right from wrong. But I was your mother. Who else was gonna do it? If you ask me, I did a pretty damn good job. That palace you live in, up there on that hill. I gave my life to my children on a silver platter. I suppose now you're not gonna kiss me.
What?
You're cruel. That's what you are.
Oh, fuck this.
Oh, no.
Oh!
And then, obviously, that kind of wraps up the the threat in a sense. But then one of the reasons the finale of the second series, Funhouse, is so wonderful, and this is one of the first Sopranos. I think it is the first Sopranos episode I remember catching on late night Channel 4 back in probably about a year, maybe after it had been on, maybe a repeat, maybe it was the first run on Channel 4. I don't know. It was a while ago. I was probably about 15. One of the reasons it's great is you kind of think, or Tony at least thinks it's mission accomplished. He thinks the season's game is over almost, and then that episode just sets about showing you how it isn't. And on some level, Tony knows that.
Yeah. He's just in denial. Basically, he's just trying to he's just got his blinkers on, and yeah, it's brilliant. And as the audience that this has to come to a head, like it's going to happen. Then you have the fish dream, which is just brilliant.
Yeah, well, there's a few dreams prompted by Tony's food poisoning, aren't they, throughout the episode? So they've got that kind of fig leaf of justifiability, in terms of the show getting a bit trippy and surreal. But it's probably something where you see another strand in the Sopranos DNA, which is basically the legacy of Twin Peaks. In terms of respectable film-like TV being something that gets trippy and psychologically indulgent and maybe even overtly surreal at times. And this is probably the episode where The Sopranos goes most off the deep end thus far.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was very avant-garde and kind of strange and very, very Twin Peaks, but it worked, and it showed as well that the show is not going to be afraid of encompassing these kind of surreal, almost like Lynchian elements into it as well. So you don't, again, it's not afraid of that kind of territory.
I think also, we were talking before about college in season 1. I think the Tony, Silvio, and Paulie end up taking Pussy out on the yacht, and after the sort of confrontation scene they have with him, which is great in its own right. Everything about that scene's great. They end up executing him for being an informant, and I think that was another moment where they'd had conversations where, like, are we actually going to do this? Because again, it's that step up, isn't it? As you say, they laid the groundwork, but this is more. This is Tony and his closest lieutenants killing this character that you've come to not exactly love, but know and certainly have sympathy for.
Well, what did you think of the bit that was kind of interesting for me is when Silvio goes up on the deck and he's leaning over, and he's saying, "I'm seasick," but that's bullshit. Well, do you think it was just simply he's just really upset about having to kill his brother?
Silvio's a really interesting character, actually. I won't spoil this, but there's moments in the show to come where there are interesting conversations to be had about whether Silvio is one of the more empathetic members of the crew or one of the least. there's quite a lot around that,
Right. Is he a poser, or is he actually the real McCoy?
There's something odd going on with him. I put it that way. I think there's a lot going on with him. But it's not as simple as him just being the nicest one. put it that way. Yeah, that whole scene, everything from like Pussy's fiddling with the stereo, putting on the music, and turns around and realizes that the game's up, and his whole like partial confession, and then like slightly more thorough confession, and he's still trying to justify it to them. He's pleading. So they talk about like the stages of grief, don't they? Like he kind of goes through them all.
Yeah, in fast forward, and the bit where they're having the quote unquote locker room talk, about the girl that he was sleeping with, when he was away, and then at the end he just goes, "Was she real though?"
Yeah, did any of that even happen? And it's just...
Exactly, and that's a metaphor for their whole relationship, isn't it? It's quite superb, and
it's kind of tied in a little bit to the now that I think about it, to the Carmela stuff in that episode as well, because like it less so in the previous episode, but more so in the finale. There's the stuff running through it about Tony's mistress's suicide attempt, Irina's suicide attempt, and Tony leaving her, but more because she's become a nuisance, really, more than like that he's suddenly become a nice guy or wants to be honest with Carmela.
Yeah,
and you've got that kind of those double meanings and layers of cheating, haven't you, on someone, or lying to them, or putting up this false front, because basically Tony's dealing with a sort of situation like his like mob wife is cheating on him, basically. That's what he's dealing with, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And Carmela is not to get into like sort of change direction, but Carmela is one of those kind of like Diane Keaton characters, like in The Godfather, like you kind of throughout the first and second season, I was kind of like, what, how much sympathy do I have for her? And I suppose it's dwindling, isn't it? As the series go on, you're kind of like, you know what's going on here. Especially in that scene after the death of Richie, when he comes home and he collapses, and it's like, in that moment, you're meant to think that she knows everything. Like, she knows exactly what he's hinting at, and it's like, oh. And then she sort of changes the subject. It's really, that's quite a dark scene, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's quite dark. It's very darkly funny though as well. There's a similar scene at the end of the first season where they're talking about, I think tacitly that she knows he now has to kill Junior, that kind of thing. But it's like, this she stops just. I mean, she pries and then he stops telling her, seemingly for her own good. But she just is so great at moving the conversation on as well, and just rationalising it away with those little platitudes that you'd say if you heard your friends had broken up. Just like that was not a happy union. That was not a blessed marriage and things like that.
It was not a happy union.
She knows what's happened really, or she knows the kind of thing that's happened.
Yeah, but she knows that there'll be no more questions asked, and that's just going to be that. So she might as well not go down that rabbit hole. Yeah, superb.
Yeah, and on some level, she's kind of happy with that level of knowledge as well.
Yeah. You don't want to know anymore. Like, she's never, for a fact they've never had that, or maybe they have had that conversation, like, 20 years ago or something, and that was enough. That was enough. So she got some detail about the forensics of it.
Yeah, well, that scene at the end of that episode where I think it's Meadows' graduation they're celebrating, isn't it? And Tony's like temporarily arrested, embarrassing Meadow in front of her friends, but then he gets out in time to be at a graduation. But one of my favourite shots, and I love the ending of this, like is in The Sopranos. They've got that Rolling Stones song playing that's kind of haunting, and Tony's, you hear like waves in the background and stuff, and Tony's just at the like kind of standing by the buffet at Meadows' thing, and the crowd's parting to, you the audience are watching him, and he's smoking a cigar, isn't he? And he just looks like the most, suddenly he like looks like the most inhuman kind of scary monster, like demon, sort of puffing away at you the audience, and it's kind of like, like no one else can see him, and they should, and it's one of the most menacing ends to it, and you like, I think more so than at the end of the first series, you're like, wow, this is our main character, we're stuck with this guy.
Yeah, like you're proud of yourselves. This is the guy you've been following for like 2 seasons. It makes the audience, it makes you question yourself, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it sure does, and hopefully it will continue to. We'll leave it there, Matt, because I think there's tons. I mean, I could talk for double, triple that length on either of those series, but I think it's a good point to leave it because we've touched on some of the things that you're finding interesting at the moment about the characters and about Tony and the rest of the family and everything, and I promise you, even just in series 3 and 4, a lot more will come up, and I hope we get to reconvene for another chat soon.
Oh, me too, dude. I mean, this has basically been the starter pistol for us carrying on with season 3, so yeah, I'm glad that we've got this out of the way. Now we can carry on, and I'm looking forward to it, dude.
Oh, terrific. Look forward to discussing that. There's loads of episodes I love in season 3, so I'll definitely have a lot to say about that.
Nice one, man. Thank you for having me again, dude. I appreciate it. We let's do this again soon on a different subject.
Absolute pleasure. And I look forward to hearing your Halloween podcast as well, which we'll plug when it comes out. Thanks again.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to the EscapeGoat podcast, hosted by David Blake Fagiani. If you want to contact the podcast with any feedback or thoughts, you can leave comments on our Libsyn page or under our YouTube videos, or email us at escapegoatpod@gmail.com. You can also reach the show on Twitter on @egoat_pod and follow us for new episode notifications, or get me personally on @dbfagiani. This podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as our Libsyn site, escapegoatpodcast.libsyn.com. Original intro, outro, and any other incidental music for this podcast is composed, produced, and made available by permission of Richard Gilbert.